Good morning, everyone. This month we are talking about religions of the world. We've covered Islam with Reverend Franklin. Next week we'll have Hinduism with Reverend Margaret. But today I'm going to talk about Buddhism from the perspective of New Thought. Now, a Buddhist monk went up to a hot dog vendor. I had to get this out of the way, you know. Buddhist monk went up to the hot dog vendor and said, "Make me one with everything." Handed him a $20 bill. So the vendor handed him back his sandwich. And the Buddhist monk said, "Where's my change?" And the hot dog vendor says, "Change must come from within." Okay, now that we got that out of the way, Buddha, the man for whom Buddhism was named, was born around 563 BC in what is now known as Nepal, but it's close to the Indian border. And his full name was Siddhartha Gautama of the Sakyas. Siddhartha's father was a king, and in those days there were many kingdoms in India. It was really cut up, many kingdoms. And Buddha was reported to be extraordinarily handsome. He married a neighboring princess when he was 16 years old, who bore him a son. And being an heir to his father's throne, he was destined for fame and power. But what happened? Well, in his 20s, a discontent fell over him, which led him to make a complete break with his worldly estate. And a source of the discontent is told in the legend of the four passing sights. And these four passing sights came after a fortune teller told his parents when he was just a baby that their son's future looked ambiguous to him. He said if he remained in the world, he would become a great conqueror and that he would unite India. But if he forsook the world, he would become a great redeemer for the world. So naturally, his father tried to steer him toward the former destiny. And this is the part I like. His father spared no expense trying to keep him attached to the world. He gave him 3 palaces and 400 dancing girls. Wow. I don't know if I'd ever made it out there on the religious tour. Gee. Everyone was given strict orders for Siddhartha that he was not to ever witness any ugliness, decrepitude, death, or ugliness of any sort. And so the 4 passing sights became the failure for his father to shield him from those sights, because one day he beheld a decrepit old man. The second day he saw a body that was racked with disease. The third day he saw a corpse. And the fourth day he saw a monk with a begging bowl, an ochre robe, a shaved head. And in this legend, he wondered, where was the realm of life where there was no disease or death? You ever wonder that? I've wondered that. Where was the realm of life where there is no disease or death? So he left his palace and he joined a band of ascetics that give up everything. And after almost dying from starvation, he learned the futility of asceticism because the skin of his stomach had become so thin that it was touching his spine. He said, what's the point of this? And this provided him with his first insight into one of his first principles, the principle of the middle way. A way between the indulgence of the world and giving up everything, including food. So he began at this time a program of rigorous thought and concentration along the lines of a form of Hindu yoga at that time called Raja Yoga. And then one day he sat down underneath that tree. I can't remember exactly what we botanists would call that tree, but it's called the Bodhi tree for us, for this story. And Bodhi means enlightenment. And later they called this spot where he sat down the movable spot. And you'll see why. His first night he experienced a temptation similar to the temptations that Jesus experienced when he spent 40 days in the desert. And his devil or evil one that tempted him was called Mara. And Mara tempted him many times, and he avoided these temptations. And then, through all of this, his great awakening came. And he spent 7 days in mind-blowing bliss. Now, where I read all of this, they had several paragraphs of the color and the events of this mind-blowing bliss, which I won't go into with you now, but, it was very colorful. Looked like looking at pictures of the universe. Have you seen those pictures of the universe through the space telescopes? That was what was happening to Buddha. He was just exploding into the universe. And then on the 8th day, he tried to stand up, but he couldn't. And so he remained there in the immovable spot for 49 days of this rapture. So he was enlightened. And so Mara, the evil one, she had one more temptation for him at the end of this. She said, "Why remain in the world? Now that you're enlightened, why remain in the world? For who could understand such a profound truth that you have just experienced? How could such a revelation be reduced to words? How could he show what can only be found, or how could he teach what can only be learned?" Mara's argument almost persuaded him, but in the end he replied, "There will be some who will understand." There will be some who will understand. So Buddha then trudged the dusty roads of India for 45 years preaching his message. And his message, like the words of the Bible, were never written down till centuries and centuries afterwards. And he died at the age of 80. And 2 sentences that he spoke have echoed through the ages. And these 2 sentences are this: all compounded things decay. Work out your own salvation with diligence. Now, I think that teaching is very similar to what we teach. We teach that everyone has their own experience of whatever God is or whatever God isn't to them, and that we have to work out our own comfort and understanding of the world for ourselves. Of course, these teachings help us, but we believe that forms pass. Forms are formed and forms pass. And so people were puzzled about Buddha, and when they would question him, the answer he gave provided an identity for his entire message. They said, "Are you a god?" "No." "Are you an angel?" "No." "Are you a saint?" "No." "Well, then what are you?" And Buddha replied, "I am awake," which is the meaning for Buddha. I am awake. The most striking thing about the Buddha, according to historians, is that his combination of having a cool head and a warm heart, because he's considered by historians as one of the great rationalists of all time. But despite being rational, Buddhism is also a religion of infinite compassion. So that combines the head and the heart, which we always talk about in the science of mind. We have this very intellectual teaching of the science of mind, but if we don't bring it into the heart, it's just a theory, right? So it's important that Buddhism be seen from the backdrop of Hinduism at the time, and Reverend Mark is going to tell us about Hinduism next week. Hinduism was an old religion. It had evolved over centuries, but Buddhism sprang up really fast. And Buddha believed that he had a cosmic mission to perform. And so he couldn't waste any time. And he was a rebel because Buddhism was largely a religion of reaction to Hindu perversions. You know, an old religion that's got so institutionalized, so ritualized, and built with all these authorities that you have to go through. Sound familiar? Yeah. And so his was an Indian version of Protestantism. You know, Protestantism comes from the word protest. Protesting against the way it was. And now lots of those Protestant religions, we have to protest again, because they have become. You see where I'm going. So, early Buddhism was devoid of the 6 aspects of religion. And those 6 aspects of religion, what always happens is there's authority, there's ritual, there's speculation. Oh, I think there's going to be dancing girls in heaven. Yeah. Therapeutic. I skipped that. No, that was wrong. Authority, ritual, speculation, tradition. It's got to be this way. Grace. Oh no, but you can't just get grace. You've got to go through us. And mystery or supernatural. Those are 6 aspects of religion that early Buddhism rejected. Authority, ritual, speculation, tradition, grace, and supernatural. Buddha preached a religion of intense self-effort. It was empirical, scientific, pragmatic, therapeutic, psychological, egalitarian, and it was directed to individuals. Any of those things sound familiar? Sound like a lot of the aspects that we teach, right? I think that's why Buddhism appeals to a lot of New Thought people. Buddha said one thing. One thing I teach, he said, suffering and the end of suffering. Why do we come into these rooms? We have suffering, and we want an end to suffering. We want to enjoy life. We want to live an abundant life. Buddha taught what he called the 4 noble truths. First, that life is dukkha. That's the Indian word for suffering. And the exact meaning of dukkha is that life, in the condition that it has gotten itself into, is dislocated. It's out of joint. Something's gone wrong. Friction is excessive. Movement is blocked. And what does it do? It hurts. The second noble truth is tanha. The cause of life's dislocation is tanha. So tanha means cause and effect. The third noble truth follows the second. If the cause is selfish craving, for instance, Its cure lies in the overcoming of such craving. And the fourth noble truth prescribes how the cure can be accomplished. And it can be accomplished by this, the eightfold path. The eightfold path is right views, thinking rightly, right intent, intending rightly, right speech, speaking rightly, right conduct, acting rightly, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. That's why meditation is so important. One Buddhist text opens with these words: all we are is the result of what we have thought. Does that sound familiar? And the eighth point on the eightfold path is right concentration. Something else that meditation helps us with. And you've all heard of the basic concept of Buddhism, which is nirvana. Not the rock group, but nirvana. Yeah. The word nirvana actually means to blow out or extinguish, like extinguishing a fire. Deprived of the air, the fire goes out. It's extinct. It's annihilated. But he's talking as in our ego, our finite self, the self that desires, annihilating it, blowing it out. And Buddha said, bliss, yes, bliss, my friends, is nirvana. So Buddhism, and this is an interesting point for me. Buddhism professes no God. And if an absence of a personal creator God is atheism, then Buddhism is atheistic. But remember, there's a second meaning of God, which is Godhead, which is devoid of personality, which would pertain to Buddhism and pertains to us too, because we don't believe in a personal creator God. We believe more in a Godhead, a energy, a love, an indivisible substance out of which everything is created. So this would pertain to Buddhism also, because we say that God is the ground of being rather than being itself. And the most startling thing that the Buddha said about the human self is that it has no soul. Now, I know that a lot of us would take that one up in an argument. You all think about it. We may have some discussions around here. But he says it from the point of view that we don't have a separate identity forever. Why? Because in reality, we are all one. And of course, everyone has heard of karma and reincarnation, right? You know, I hear reincarnation's making a comeback. Yeah. But you know, I didn't believe in reincarnation the last time. Anyway. Karma is that chain of causation threading each life to those that have led up to it and to those that will follow. Cause and effect, once again. Throughout this sequence, the will remains free to do what it wants. Buddha's 3 marks of existence were these. Impermanence. You've seen the Tibetan Buddhist mandalas where they spend days and weeks with their colored tiles creating a beautiful, or pieces of sand, I guess it is, it's sand, creating these beautiful landscapes. And then all of a sudden, the master comes in and goes, and it goes away. That's one of their teachings of the ways of impermanence. The 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering. And the third one is the absence of a permanent identity or soul. Nothing in nature is identical with what it was the moment before. We can all attest to that, right? And that's part of our suffering too, isn't it? We want to keep things just as they are. We wanted to keep little Nelson just as he was. But we couldn't. That's why attachments lead to suffering. Buddhism was divided into 2 camps in the early religion. One took its motto from Buddha's dictum to be lamps unto yourself and work out your own salvation with diligence. And the other group, and this was the more the head, we got the head and the heart. In all religions, there's the people that want to stick to the head and the people that want to go in the heart. You can find that in all religions. The other group held that compassion is a more important feature of enlightenment, arguing that to seek enlightenment by oneself and for oneself is a contradiction in terms. For them, human beings are more social than individual, and love is the greatest thing in the world. So we have the head Buddhist and the heart Buddhist. Both divisions call themselves rafts or ferries. And the Hindu word for that is yana. And both claim to carry people across life's sea to the shores of enlightenment. The second group believed in cosmic help or grace, and this was Buddhism for the people. This was the more compassionate version. This was the larger division. Mahayana Buddhism was the big raft. And the first group, the head Buddhists, were Hinayana for little raft, but they didn't like being called the little raft. So they changed their name to Theravada, which means the way of the elders. So they got the upper hand, eventually. So Mahayana, the big raft, evolved beliefs that were more like traditional religious beliefs. More of the heart stuff moved in, and they had more ritual. And then the real Buddhists, the full-time Buddhists, the first ones, they go off to the monastery and they meditate, all the time. And that's how they did it. So there's another type of Buddhism that evolved from the Chinese that was greatly influenced by Taoism. And I hope that we do some more on religion, and we do Taoism sometime, because I find it a fascinating religion. In the West, it became popular in the 50s with the beat poet generation. It's called Zen Buddhism. Everybody's heard of Zen. The classic Zen sermon was the Buddha's flower sermon. And Jean McGee brought me these lovely flowers for Nelson today, and I thought I would use them. And this was what Buddha's flower sermon was. He stood on a mountaintop with his disciples all around him, and he didn't say a word. He just stood there, holding a golden lotus flower in front of him. Never said a word, just stood there for a long, long time. And no one understood the meaning of his gesture except one disciple who kind of gave him a little bit of a smirk. And he caught the message. And so later on, Buddha designated this follower as his successor. And then Zen was carried to China in 520 A.D. by Bodhidharma, and from there it spread to Japan in the 12th century. And Zen, entering Zen is it's described to be like entering through Alice's looking glass. It's a topsy-turvy wonderland where everything seems quite mad, charmingly mad for the most part. Crazy dialogues between the masters and the students, obscure conundrums, paradoxes, contradictions, yelling and insulting, all carried off in a cheerful and innocent manner. It being of Zen's essence that it cannot be understood by the limited truth of words. So they make breaking the language barrier their central concern. And that's where all these conundrums and crazy dialogues and paradoxes come in. Because the Zen master sees that through all questions, seekers are trying to fill the lack in their lives with words and concepts instead of realizations. And that reminded me of our teaching. Ernest Holmes said, I would rather one person prove these principles in the science of mind than 1,000 people recite theories and try to understand it intellectually. You'd rather see them demonstrate it in their lives. So signposts are not the destination. As in many religions, the prophet points the way and the disciples worship his finger. In Zen, they use this example. They use the example of a finger pointing to the moon. And lest people's attention turn to the finger, they will point quickly only to withdraw their finger at once. Zen is not interested in theories about enlightenment. It wants the real thing. We're not interested in theories about demonstration, are we? We want the real thing. We want to demonstrate the abundant life. Zen wants to force the student to crash the language barrier, the word barrier. We're all familiar with the sound of two hands clapping, right? What is the sound of one hand clapping? If you say one hand can't clap, you go to the back of the class. Zen master to the student. I've never met someone so thoughtless in my life. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Master. What was the appearance of your face before your ancestors were born? A monk approaches a master saying, I've just come to this monastery. Would you kindly give me some instruction? The master asks, have you eaten your breakfast yet? The monk says, I have. The master says, then go wash your bowls. If you cannot find the meaning of life in an act as simple as that of doing the dishes, you will not find it anywhere. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. When you can perceive the infinite in the finite, there comes finally an attitude of general agreeableness. Yesterday was fair, today's raining. An attitude of total acceptance. And I'd like to finish with this reading by Seng San, called Trust in the Heart. The perfect way knows no difficulties except that it refuses to make preferences. Only when freed from hate and love does it reveal itself fully and without disguise. 1/10 of an inch's difference, and heaven and earth are set apart. If you wish to see it before your own eyes, have no fixed thoughts either for or against it. To set up what you like against what you dislike, that is the disease of the mind. The way is perfect like unto vast space, with nothing wanting, nothing superfluous. It is due to making choices that its suchness is lost sight of. The one is none other than the all none other than the one. Take your stand on this, and the rest will follow of its own accord. I have spoken, but in vain, for what can words tell of things that have no yesterday, tomorrow, or today? And so it is.